thank you for being with us.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Both okay from my birth country, g'day. I've been over here for 36, 37 years and love it. So you know, I'm Pakeha, just going through. So I want to talk to you about what the registry is, where it comes from, and a little bit about it, so you know where I come from, so that makes a little bit of sense in terms of how I'm running the registry and the registrar position. So, who am I nodding at to get the first slide? Magic, okay. Now this is a bit boring, and I want you to write down if you want these slides, we can send them to you later on, but primarily slides for me to talk to and so you don't stare at me. So, twofold. The Commission started and set up in 2021, so it's young, it's very young, and has 6 months terms, so with people who know what they're doing. And part of the Canon 2 says that they can appoint a registrar. That's me. The registrar is conferred under the canon, so it's all kind of legalistic, except it's in church terms. I have the general duty to direct and supervise the administration of discipline within the church. If that's not a hard ask, I don't know what is. It doesn't say you have to be, but they have adhered to that the registrar has to be a barrister or a solicitor, a lawyer, of at least 7 years standing. And I can employ someone else to assist me in that. This is Vanda. She is my godsend, literally. She provides me not only with humour, but also facts and figures that allow me to do my job. All right? So I come back to that. This is very important. Waving. That's all I have to do. In other words, who am I? So you need to know a bit about me to understand where I come from, because I've got this position which sounds like it's a very weighty position, which it is, very responsible. But I've got 40 plus years in law as a lawyer and a barrister. If someone asked me to describe myself, really I'd say I'm a criminal who works in human rights. So it's a bit of a mixture. So I've lived here, as I said, for 35 years plus. When I was in Australia, my background, and I'm independent, remember, I'm not affiliated with it. In fact, I'm not affiliated with a denomination. But in my youth, I worked for the Sydney City Mission, which was an interdenomination mission over there. I also in probation and parole sector. While doing that, I was studying for law. And when I completed my law degree, I worked for prosecutions in New South Wales and primarily dealt with child cases and criminal cases. I also, just on a sideline, was the president of the Kubler-Ross Association. I don't know if many of you are old enough to remember Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and a couple of nods in the place, and had the privilege of working with some terminally ill children. And that was about communication, and that was probably my beginning of my journey in turning a career in law into also a communication journey with those people that I worked with, whether they be guilty or not guilty, didn't matter. Communication. I had a legal case over here, and my two pseudo children, they were my nieces. My sister had died, so I took them on, but they'd all grown up, and it was time for me to give them some space, and I came over here. So, did a lot of things when I came here, until I got the job lecturing in the business studies in Christchurch. I actually did some cleaning at the one of the motels there, and I thought I really enjoyed that job. And then they gave me a job as a lawyer again, and I had to kind of think, okay, better do that. I did my master's down in Christchurch, and at the same time I worked with the prosecution on the Christchurch civic creche case, and Peter Ellis's case, and also on Gay Oak's case, if anyone remembers those two cases. And once I'd done my thesis, I came up and worked as a lecturer in law at Waikato University, and got a bit bored at that. It's just all these young people that thought they knew a lot more than they did. And they all now practice in Hamilton, where I'm practicing in mental health. And I went on the New Zealand Parole Board. And I did that full time. And I have to say, in the 6 years that I did that, I learnt more about humanity and mental health and drugs and alcohol and the need of Maori in particular than just lecturing in a lecture theatre. And formed some good friendships with some of the men and women that appeared before the parole board. And it struck me then that the level of mental health issues in prison was just so high that it wasn't being dealt with. So when I left the parole board, I was offered a warrant by government, and people say, who's the government? And I kind of say, well, it feels like it's God. Just comes down and gives you a 3-year warrant to go off and do this work. But now I work as a district inspector for mental health, which is like an ombudsman. So there's 3 of us in the Waikato, because it's so big, and we work with every person who is under compulsory treatment, either in the community or in the hospital of the Mental Health Act. So it's quite a large role to fill, and we also can take investigations and make sure that their rights are upheld. So that's my other full-time, part-time job. And now we come to the registrar's position. And the reason I put that through to you about that is that Vanda, who I really rely on, is that she also works in a full-time, part-time position. So there's a little bit of tension in terms of time factors as I've taken on this role. So what is it? This role essentially is, I'm the person who gets the complaint, right? I'm the person who says, okay, thank you, got the complaint. You can't read that, and I didn't anticipate that you could, but it was just to say there is a procedure. And at the beginning of the procedure is the receipt of the complaint because you feel that a member of the church has offended or done something wrong. Okay? And sure, there is a complaint form, and we now have them in Danda, Māori, Tongans, Hindi, and so we have tried to start addressing what I see as a huge gap in the Title D process, and it's huge. And I'll say that now, because we have to find a better way for tikanga Māori, tikanga Pacifica to be able to come easily to this system and be understood. So that's part of a new process, in part, not all, formed by Pākehā that comes across as a Pākehā system. So I can't apologise for that, I didn't form it, but we are seeing the gap in it and we are trying to address it. So just so you know that that's really there. And one of the reasons I said that the complaint form is in all those languages is I'm hearing, and it's not just today, that filling in a form can be difficult for certain people in certain cultures. Not only because of internet connection, but because of communication disparity. Sometimes it's easier to talk, and sometimes that's also inhibited. So we've got to find that nice fluid way of being able to hear everyone, because the basis of this is being able for me to hear what you're saying and go out and see if that is a genuine complaint, whether or not I can then do something about it. I'll come back to that if I may. The complaint process itself is that anyone can make a complaint, so that's great. You don't have to be the person who's subject to that complaint. You don't have to be the abused person. It comes to me, and we'll come back to how it comes to me. And then I've got to figure out whether or not, just like criminal law, whether there's a substance to it, whether it fits within some of these black and white rules, and they can't change, they're canons. I mean, we can't change what type of complaint is received. Is that all making sense? If this is going too fast, yeah, nod. Yeah, don't want to bore you to death, because this is like law, can bore you to death, how to go to sleep. Okay. Essentially, canon, Title D, Vanda will always tell me to say it in the correct way. Title D, yeah, I'm right. Title D, Canon 1, lays out the principles that those who are licensed must uphold, and you can complain about if they stuff it up. That make sense? Okay. But if your complaint doesn't go into that, I may not be able to uphold it. So I've got to investigate it. And officially I've got 20 days to do that in. I have yet to have one that has met that 20 days threshold. Because, well, one, it's a full-time, part-time job for me. Full-time, part-time job for Vanda. And it's not that easy to get the information sometimes. Sometimes I've got to walk away and think about it, and I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, that's who I should talk to. Or maybe I should write a letter there. Or maybe it doesn't come within the canon at all. So that's a process. If there is enough sufficient substance, legally put, not so legally put, if it's got enough legal guts behind it, then I have to apply natural justice. Don't want to just have a knee-jerk reaction. Have to allow the person who's complained and the person who's complained about each to have their say. I can't just say that's obviously wrong. I have to hear the other side, just like in criminal court. So you've got to have both sides. You've got to do this long process. And we have to tell them what's going on. And then I get to decide whether it's either of two things. Whether it's unsatisfactory conduct, in which case I then go to the bishop and say it's unsatisfactory conduct, deal with it, which is really unfair on the bishops, I found. I don't know about you, Bishop, why, but that's a hard one. My view is I like to give some options. If there's a mediation involved, I like to give an option of mediation. I'm forming a list of mediators that might be able to go in, and that helps the bishop. Or I could find and say to the bishop, this is so serious, it's misconduct, and I'll come back to that. Okay. So, see all that? It's all about communication, how to communicate with the registrar. And it's the key. We now have a phone, and I check it every day at 5 o'clock because my alarm clock on my phone goes off. And the dog knows, A, it's time for his dinner, and B, I have to ring the free phone first to see if there's any messages. So I react, the dog reacts, and I phone. And I check out the messages, and I do. And I try and respond within 24 hours. Okay. It has been used, it could be used a lot more, particularly for those people who are very wary of or don't have internet, don't have whatever, phone credit, at least it's a free phone. It should be used more, because then we can figure out different ways of getting a complaint through. And I'm happy with that. Just had a matter where I actually offered to record and take a complaint over the phone if the person wanted to pursue it, because it was such a difficult subject of sexual abuse. And I had to understand that, how difficult it would be. And then it was a choice of, we can do it by Zoom, so we can do it face to face, or you can do it just on the phone and I can audio record you. But I figured face to face would be easier for this person, because at least there was someone who was responding to such heavy information. So the phone's there. If I don't check the email daily, Vanda does. Both of us do. We talk daily anyway. I'm beginning to wonder if we should just have a family gathering. We talk so much. I sit down in my place in Hautapu, or just out of Cambridge, and my office is independent to the house, and I work remotely until I'm going into mental health work, in which case I'm going into Henry Bennett Psychiatric Centre. Vanda obviously is sitting, where would you, at the college, in the General Synod office. So we do a lot of communication by email. We've linked it up. So communications, don't make a noise, quite important. So there's ways of contacting the registrar. You might have noticed that there's 2 people in the registry, me and V. So the workload has actually got quite large at the moment, and we're going to have to work on that ourselves, because it is a lot of work that's coming through. So far we're coping quite well. We haven't been rude to each other, just to everybody else. I think that's only reasonable. Okay. So this being able to email me, phone me, Zoom me, Team me, whatever me, is really important from my point of view. So if someone, and it has happened, contact with a bishop, actually, and said, I've got this situation and how do I handle it, and should it be a complaint? And in that instance I said, well, you know, maybe this is just sitting down and doing the old-fashioned have a cup of tea and talk about it stuff, with all of you there. And what I'm finding is a lot of bishops, not you, Bishop White, actually don't have confidence in their ability to communicate and to facilitate any reconciliation or mediation. They're not being trained in it, they'll put it down to someone else who may have those skills, or on the other hand, do not. So it's a difficult one, that, but at the same time, it's in the canon. If you can, you try and reconcile. And to me, as an independent, semi-heathen, that means mediate to find a middle ground that you can all live with. Reconcile your faith, if necessary, during that process. That's beyond me. So communication, I think, is just absolutely key. And often, the clarity that can be given by discussing a problem, you all know this, you're women, you do it all the time. I've got a problem, so I'll talk it over with my mate, with whoever. And you hear yourself talk and you think, I know what to do, or I feel better, or I'm heard. And therefore it's resolved. What I'm finding is every now and then there's a knee-jerk reaction coming through in terms of complaint, where I look at it and think, oh my goodness, why do you just talk it through? Why don't you? I talk a lot to the computer, by the way. You know, for Pete's sake, where's your common sense? And that's exactly what is needed. So if they'd rung me and said, I've got a problem with blah in my congregation, and I'd say, talk about it, a lot of the time they would have gone, oh yeah, I know what to do now. And I wouldn't have said a word, maybe. And off they go. All right. That type of communication is really important when it isn't within these two serious strains of unsatisfactory conduct or misconduct. You know, quite often. So you think, okay, I've made a complaint and nothing's happened and this terrible registrar's dismissed it. Quite often in my dismissal, I'm saying to the registrar, will you sit down and talk to this person? Because their hurt, their misunderstanding that they feel is not going to go away because I've said, look, I'm sorry, it doesn't come within the Title D, Canon 3, Clause blah. Doesn't come within that. It doesn't mean it goes away. And then it festers and festers. And it'll come back bigger than Ben-Hur and maybe a proper complaint next time because it hasn't been dealt with back here. So, if anything, I'm saying to all of you, if you get even a glimmer that there's problems running around in the congregation or between you and your brethren, try and nip it in the bud by actually listening to it, even if you think it's absolutely crazy, because you might be nipping something that could be quite serious in the bud. And you're also doing a service to that person by hearing them. And if you're not heard, festers. Get angry, don't you, Bishop Bly? Because you're not heard. And that's all you want to do, is be heard. That's part of the process. Okay. So I can make that final report. As I say, it doesn't disappear. If the complainant, the person complaining, is not happy with me and what I've said as my final report, they can review. Right? That goes to the chair of the Ministry Standards Commission, and they review it. What is unfair, and I'm hoping to get fixed, is that the person who is complained about has no rights to say, I want a review too, at least under unsatisfactory conduct. I think it should be, if you're going to sling arrows, and it might hit the mark, you at least allow that person to take the arrow out and say, can you try that again? Check it out. So it should be a two-way deal there, and that's something that worries me, actually. The other thing that worries me, and I say it for any of you that have to deal with these complaints, is that I do make a final report and I do suggest mediation or reconciliation or a phone call or whatever, and the bishop says, fine, then I never hear what happens. And it might be 4 months along the track, someone writes and says, well, no one's contacted me, what's going on? I think. So I have to go and gently say, do something. Or it has worked and I still don't know. And it's good to have some understanding of where the process is going. Gives me an idea of how to evaluate the whole process. An evaluation has to happen of this. It's a new system of trying to make transparent any transgressions within the Anglican Church. So anyone can look at it and say, yes, they've acknowledged it, they've taken responsibility, they've set up a process. That process is being looked at quite regularly, but anyone can see it. It has to be transparent. Oh, you've all seen the reports of Dilworth and the Royal Commission and all of those. All of it is crying out for transparency within the churches. Okay. The last thing I'll say about the ones that are not necessarily serious within the canons are those ones that don't seem quite trivial to me as a registrar or to the bishop and people around the bishop. But they're serious to the person who's making the complaint. And it's very difficult for me, and there's a complainant that has been in the wings for a pretty long time now, Vanda, knows exactly who I'm about to talk to. And our final complaint is, look, it's outside what I can do. It happened too long ago. It wasn't within the canons. I've sent a final report to the bishop asking that some reconciliation take place and mediation. Nothing's happening, so now it's the feeling of being aggrieved or unheard has manifold effects. So we can get daily emails now. What are you doing? What are you doing? I disagree. And I feel really sorry for this person because I can't do anything more. But he just needs to be heard. You don't have to validate the complaint. You don't have to sit there and say, but. You just have to listen and then say, we may have to agree to disagree, but I have heard you. And so if there is a suggestion that some form of reconciliation take place, it's not just about that complaint, it's about the complainant's feeling of being heard. I just want to make that really clear. Okay. And the bishops, of course, will quite often hand down the job of reconciliation or mediation down the line, and that's going to be up to the skills of whom he or she hands it down to. And some will have good mediation skills already, some really need to be upskilled for it to work. Okay, the more major ones are set out in the canons. And did I put it in here? Yes, I did. And the general principles for unsatisfactory conduct as well as misconduct are contained in the general principles or clauses 1 and 2. But virtually what the canon 1 says is, and let me read it from a summary. People in the Anglican ministry are expected to behave in an exemplary way, both in their work for the church and in their personal lives and relationships. That's a way high bar, but it's there. People in the Anglican ministry must work well and respectfully with their bishop, their colleagues, and all others offering ministry. That's way hard because you've got power and control issues, you've got gender inequality, you've got a whole heap of things that go on there. It's nice to have something to try and get to. I wouldn't say that everybody is there yet. Ministers must care for the needy with humility and compassion, build up the church and proclaim the good news in accordance with the doctrine of the Anglican Church. That's probably the easiest one out of all of it because all of you are caring people. So that goes, you don't have to think about that too much. In their counselling, pastoral support and the many forms of care for the vulnerable, the sick, the dying and people in any stage of life, ministers must maintain confidentiality and respect the dignity of those in their care. Ministers, in terms of the legal definition, is people who are licensed, but it's also just common humanity, isn't it? And then they've got the last one, if you commit a crime, you're out in your ear. If it goes over 3 months, basically. So, they're the bars. And there's many more that are more specific that you can go and read. It is easy read, most of them are easy read. But the start of a complaint is to get a complaint to me. If you know of someone who for cultural reasons or distance reasons, and I'm thinking Samoa, Fiji, that's really hard. Internet can be patchy, language can be patchy. Culture is something that I need to understand a lot more, but I know the different stratas of if you like, ministers or from Martai down, etc., talking chiefs. Those are things we need to understand and be able to build into this. But until we can get that done, we need to say, please help people to communicate with the registrar. If they've got a complaint that is worthy, or even if it's not worthy, they need to be heard. Help them communicate with the office. And it may have to be by a quick phone call, and I'll write it down because it's impossible to do it any other way. But Vander and I are flexible. Yep, we're flexible, and I know that you should have it written down on a complaint form, but sometimes writing down on a complaint form is really hard. And in one case, which did involve sexual abuse, it was beyond their ability. And I understand that. So we find different ways. So don't think that we're not going to be flexible. We just want to hear from you. And I think that goes for whether it's something that you think just needs a good listen to, or whether it's the more serious misconduct. And just to say there is a difference, unsatisfactory conduct is when a person has failed in this exemplary behaviour standard, in their dealings with those in their care, but does not include abuse. It does include, unfortunately, verbal abuse. For unsatisfactory behaviours, sometimes there has been verbal abuse that I've been dealing with, and that really doesn't go into misconduct because it's a one-off, but it has been very hurtful and needs to be dealt with. Misconduct, which is the heavy one, which goes to a tribunal, which is also heavy, is when a person in Anglican ministry has demonstrated an intentional, significant, or continuing failure to meet ministry standards. Sexual misconduct, sexual abuse and financial dishonesties are examples of this. Of the tribunals, I'm looking at Vanda, the tribunals that have been held thus far have been about sexual abuse primarily, yeah. The power and control stuff is really alive and well in the Anglican Church. I can say that as an independent person. I see it all the time. And I see also sometimes it's unconscious, absolutely unconscious. And I was saying to a priest yesterday, actually, sometimes you need to open your eyes and look wider than your own sphere, because then you'll see the effect that you're having on other people rather than the effect you want them to have from you. Power and control can be very unconscious. You need to tell people to widen their lenses. 20 days, I'll just go really quickly through the process. We've got 20 days, it doesn't work, as long as it takes, from the complaint coming in. I would then look at that complaint and see whether or not it fits within some of these descriptors in the canons, right? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it is literally because the church at the end of my road has been having noisy, singing type things in the middle of the week, and I don't understand why all those cars have to go down there during the week. So, have to explain a little bit about choir, prayer meetings. Not Title D, all right? That's when I talk to the computer. Here is your common sense. However, that person obviously has no church background and doesn't understand the workings of the church. So I have to then go on the other side and think compassion. Then it can be the Pahutakawa tree next door in the church grounds is dropping petals on my driveway. That is not a big problem, is it? 'Tis to this person. It is to this person, so therefore there has been a reconciliation in that the church will come down and do a sweep on a regular occasion. Then the person doesn't have to get angry every time they walk out their front door, rightly or wrongly. The church is being nice, and they don't have to swear about the person next door who's swearing about them. So some of them, you know, they're the type of things. I mean, there's been a couple of odd ones where I've gone, oh my, I won't say that, do not swear. That's really hard as a layperson who works in criminal law and in mental health not to swear. I just need to tell you that. What's our timeline? 2:45. Gone half an hour. Okay. Once I get a complaint, it's not Pahutakawa leaves. It's not that. And I can reply to those people, that's cool, okay? It is something I think, oh, is there smoke? Have they diddled the funds? Have they abused someone? Is there enough smoke here that means that I should go further? Then I will immediately write to the person who's accused and say there's been a complaint received. I'd really like your submissions in response, and give them a kind of a rough time limit on that. In a couple of cases, mostly you say who the complainant is, but you take away their contact details. And in one case, or two cases now, I've completely said this is a confidential complaint which I've received and I'm going to go forward with it because it's dangerous for the other people. So we go through that. During that time, I will talk to anyone that can give me what's called corroborating material, because at the end of the day, I am a lawyer. I need some evidence to support a complaint. I don't want to take a complaint forward to find out that it's tit for tat. And sometimes that's really, really difficult because there's no corroboration and I'm not allowed by the canon to judge credibility, but I do, because you have to, I'm human. So I'll talk to the respondent and I'll talk to the complainant if I can, and anybody else around that can give me a wide view of what's going on. And sometimes it's a very wide view because internal church politics can play their part. And then I will make a decision, if you like, and think, okay, this is unsatisfactory behaviour, how do we go forward? I have to say I drive Vanda mad on this. Okay, what do you think about this? She's my ears. Can you read this report for me and A, correct the grammar, because I'm hopeless, and also, does it make sense? Because it's really good to have that someone looking and saying, no, that didn't make sense, that's important. And then I'll make my final report to the bishop, and as I say, it'll be, I'm going to dismiss it, but please do something. I'm going to tell you it's unsatisfactory conduct because they're being a bully. Shorthand. I write it in really nice English, but shorthand. They're being a bully, it's power and control, whatever it may be. And I suggest for reconciliation. Sometimes it's independent mediator, sometimes you need to get them in for a cup of tea. I have suggested to a bishop recently that he get two people in and knock their heads together, but he didn't feel as if that was within his power. He agreed, but he didn't do it. So there's that type of unsatisfactory conduct. They can do a lot more, and it's written down. I'm not going to go into it. They can get them to do further training. They can take them from one, they can virtually demote them. They can do a lot under unsatisfactory conduct. But I can make some recommendations there. And quite often I leave it to the bishops because they're the ones who know the people. If they can see it's been unsatisfactory conduct and why, they're the ones who go, oh, and they'll ring me up and say, I was going to put him up for deacon, but maybe I shouldn't now. And I'm going, your choice. You think about it. You're the one who knows what's going on. Be sensible about it. If that's your choice, you do it, because you're the bish. Yeah? If it's misconduct, I then recommend to the bishop that a tribunal be heard to hear misconduct, in which case it's up to the bishop in the area that the bishop's in to form a tribunal, which is a chairperson who is not within the Anglican faith. I've got to get it right now, don't I, Vanda? Chairperson? Oh yeah, chairperson can be the Anglican faith. One lay person, lay meaning outside the Anglican Church, not ordained, but also outside the church, just to make sure. Okay? Just because you're not ordained doesn't mean that you won't be biased. Yeah? And one ordained. And there is provision for an appeals tribunal as well. And they get the person, the complainant has a church advocate that I appoint, and the person who is the respondent, the complained against, they get to go to a lawyer, and then it's submissions, and then it's a tribunal hearing. And at the tribunal, can be quite harsh. I was going to say, what's the word? I want to say defrocked all the time, and Vanda looks at me. Deposed. Thank you. They can be suspended. They can be spent with stipend or without stipend. But let's take the primary case of Brown, where there's a prison sentence. That's it. There ain't no coming back from that. So misconduct's the biggie, from my point of view, and I don't do it lightly. And there's a couple on the boil at the moment, and there's a couple in the wings at the moment. And I'm grateful for that, because it means that some people out there are having the courage, and it takes courage to say, I have been abused within this church. I want that person to be held responsible. And I applaud that person, because it takes bravery. It takes maturity in some ways, some emotional maturity that means that you know what you're looking for. You get it? Okay, I have bored you to death. When you get a copy of the slides, that process will be nicely and neatly and in English put out for you. We will try and get it translated to other languages. You can stay there. I can stay there. Well, that's one way to make it. You want to use that one?
Thank you, Wendy, for your explanations and for your clarity. I'm going to kick things off with a couple of quick fire questions.
Now, before you do,
Oh, yeah, sure.
and it just reminded me, just to clarify something, you can then do it. You're a